Conceive, believe, achieve. Shut the f*** up.
All right, today I'm joined by the one and only one of the greatest referees, if not the best referee, my old friend, former fighter, BJJ black belt, gym owner, Birmingham's finest, the one and only Marc Goddard. Marc, what's going on, buddy? This is long overdue.
How you doing, mate? I'll tell you what, an intro. It is long overdue. Now I won't have to worry about you cussing me out in the back corridors. Come on.
Listen, for those people that don't know, we've known each other since the early days of mixed martial arts. I always tell this story, and it just speaks about you as a person. Stevie B's Workout Warehouse, an old gym in Birmingham. I drove down there to do some grappling with Braulio Estima. I got down there. The session wasn't on. I'd driven 2.5 hours by myself, and you were like, nah, mate. Nah, you ain't just driving home. You've driven all this way. Screw it. I'll get my gear on. I'll get my stuff on. Let's have a roll. And so I could get a workout out of it. And that just speaks to the type of person that you are. We've been friends for a very, very long time. Back when you were a fighter, Marc, don't worry, nothing personal is going to come out.
21, that was probably 21 years ago.
Wow.
Probably 21 years ago that was. But yeah, shout out Stevie B, the original. That's the gym that, the gym that I was based out of, where I became home. It's where Braulio first, with the very first GB Birmingham. Well, actually, that's a lie, quick one. Jiu-Jitsu in Birmingham started really famously with Hodger Gracie's dad, Mauricio Gomez, when he traveled over touring Europe. Yeah, he went to London, but the place he settled in was actually, or the place he opened up in was actually Birmingham. So Birmingham was always a real hotbed for, like I've always said to people in the UK, mate, the spoil. There was Hodger Gracie in London and Braulio Estima in Birmingham, and we had those two side by side for over 20 years. We were spoiled.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially compared to now. You know what I mean? Like the sport of mixed martial arts has evolved so much from the days that we were involved. Obviously, you were fighting, I were fighting. And sometimes, I sit there and I find myself, and I do find it kind of surreal sometimes. I'm sitting there commentating the UFC. You're one of the head referees for the UFC. We fly all over the world. We go way back, as I said. And then with your schedule and my schedule, we bump into each other backstage all the time. Like, hey, Marc, how you doing? And we always say, we're going to have a catch up. We'll grab a beer later or whatever. But then, of course, you know how it is. We're on a plane. We're out of there. We're off to the next city, or we go home or whatever. So it never happens. But I do sit there and think it's crazy how this journey with mixed martial arts has evolved for the pair of us.
Crazy, mate. I try and tell people all the time. Funny, I was talking to someone the other day about more or less the same thing. I was actually doing some stuff with John Gooden the other day for his channel and whatnot. Where I was talking about, just that, like what it was like, and like for me, when I first started, I first started reffing in 2004, totally by accident. You might remember the story because Stevie B actually had an event. It was in a field, in a marquee. It was amazing. I was supposed to fight on the event. I got injured, pulled out. And then when I turned up on the day, he said, he went, oh, you got a ref? And I was like, what? I didn't have a check. That's how I started. But 20 years ago, completely by accident. And obviously having been in the sport for years before that, I think it's the best thing to do. And you touched upon it, obviously, with fighting and stuff. Look, mate, I was never going to be a world champion, competing in MMA. But I was fortunate enough to find my calling. I wouldn't swap a single thing in my upbringing, having been around MMA for 25 years plus almost, and then, moving into the officiating side. A lot of people aren't fortunate enough to find the calling. I think luck plays a little bit more than what people want to admit. Yes, you got to work hard and stuff like that, but I'm so grateful and thankful that Stevie B putting on that event 20 years ago, the referee getting injured or just didn't turn up, he opened the door for me that I had no idea what I was walking through or into. Now look.
Yeah, no, it's an incredible journey. It really is, Marc. And I know you take your job very, very seriously, and rightly so, because it is a very important job. But just going back to like MMA in the UK in the old days, I don't think people realize, do they? Like back in the day, it was all wannabe gangsters, drug dealers running shows, people all kinds of crazy, wild people involved in the sport. You know, it's not like today where now it's caught up with America for the most part, but the scene back in the day, it was the Wild West.
Yeah, mate. It was, and again, just saying, well, I was talking about that the other day. Obviously, we got over the brow of the hill because back in the day, you remember everybody wanted to be a cage fighter, right?
Cage fighter.
And I used to hate that. People used to say to me, what do you do? And I used to say I play rugby because it's easier. I just wanted to avoid the conversation. And then obviously, like every man and his dog, I mean, in the UK, I mean, it's still like, not like that now, but obviously a lot of people may not know in the UK, there's no licensing, there's no commissions. You're kind of free to do what you want, which in a way is good, but also from an unregulated, unlicensed point of view, it's bad. But yeah, the amount, like you said, the amount of promotions, promoters, and drug dealers, it's almost like it was on the CV. Have you been to prison? Yes. Okay, you can be a promoter.
It sounds like we're joking though, but it was kind of like that. But still, good days, good memories. I'd love to see like a proper documentary or even like a TV show based around that because the amount of characters involved was funny. I know you said how you had your accidental intro to being a referee. Do you remember, Mark, on Cage Warriors? I actually had a stint at refereeing.
You know what? I wasn't there though, was I?
I don't know, but it didn't go too well.
I don't know, mate. Were you wearing jeans?
Yeah, I was wearing jeans and a black t-shirt.
I do remember something. I think weren't you in between because you were about to go on the Ultimate Fighter, and I think they said you can't fight or something like that, wasn't it? So you were about to go into the season 3, right?
Yes.
You were about to go into the Ultimate Fighter, and obviously they said if you can't compete for obvious reasons. And then obviously at that time you wanted to do something, earn a bit of cash, blah, blah, blah. I do remember something, but I don't think I was there.
Yeah, no. What it was, there was a bit of controversy because one of the cornermen or one of the fighters was a total dickhead. Do you know what I mean? And he was being like all aggro and argy.
No,
you know what I mean? Go on.
I do remember. Of course I remember. Yes, fucking hell. It was, what do you call it? He came down to, wasn't it Jacob Lovestad? It was a Scandinavian fighter. I might be wrong if it was Jacob, or it might have been. It was definitely someone. I do remember. I was the ref. I looked over. Next thing I know, you're facing off for the guy. I was like, "What are you doing?" Yeah. I do remember. I was there.
Everyone was like, "What's Bisping doing? Getting into almost a fight with one of the guys?"
You were asking him to do something, and he looked at you funny as if to say, "Like, what? You think you're a ref?" And then next thing I know.
Oh, God.
Yes, I remember.
Hey, good times, mate. I wish, obviously if we sat down as friends, we could go over some really good, funny old tales, but people aren't too interested in that. Mate, what you've done is unbelievable, Mark. It really is. As you say, you found your calling, like I did. And I'll admit with my career, I worked my ass off. Of course I did. But there was a little bit of luck and fortunate timing along the way. I always realized that. But at what point for you did it really become like, listen, this is who I am now, and this is what I'm really going to focus on? And how did you, begin to take those next steps? Was it just a case of experience and becoming a bigger figure on the scene in terms of a referee and working your way to the UFC, or was there a more formal process involved?
Just that, mate. It's funny. I keep alluding to the fact everything's fresh in my mind because people have said for me for years, I've got to get my thingy into a book. Not people necessarily interested in me, but everything that I've seen and witnessed in the last 25 plus years, I've got to get it out of my head and into a book. And it's funny because you might not remember this. So when you won the Ultimate Fighter, so go back again. So I started ref in 2004. Very quickly thereafter, I started with Cage Warriors. Obviously, your audience will know Cage Warriors was like a who's who. Mike was a belt holder there.
3 times champion.
3-time champion. I was talking about it the other day. I said before you went to the Ultimate Fight, I said he held all the belts. I said he used to walk around town like fucking Floyd Mayweather. He had no rules.
That's a lie.
He would have Cage Warrior, you'd have Cage Rage, FX. Remember FX3?
FX3.
Good FX3, Cage Warriors, Cage. I said then
Super heavyweight kickboxing champion.
Yeah. When the UFC came, obviously they knew all about you before you even went, didn't they? But so yeah, going back like when I started reffing, and then very quickly after that first accidental, Cage Warriors came knocking. I've been with Cage Warriors longer than anyone for 20 years. Still love them, all the history. You know yourself, the history they've got. You look at those belt holders, it's like a who's who, you know, not just in European MMA, but in world MMA. Some of the fighters that have actually held those belts, yourself, Dan Hardy, Rosie, Gegard Mousasi, Jeff Monson, Bigfoot Silva. I could go on forever.
It goes on and on and on. And even with the newer generations as well.
Well, of course, obviously people don't know that's where Conor came from. It's where Paddy's came from. It's where Monty McCann's. Everyone's come through Cage Warriors at some point or another. But with the reffing, and then it just started to snowball. And then, so I went from 2003 to 2007. So when you'd won, was it the end of 06 when you'd won Ultimate Fighter?
Yeah, June 06, yeah.
There you go. So when the UFC were obviously ready to come back, and like you were going to be the figurehead for the British market, obviously. And then when you fought in UFC 75 Manchester,
UFC 70.
70, was it Eric Schaefer or was it Elvis?
No, that was UFC 66 in Vegas. Elvis Sinner. King of Rock and Rumble, UFC 70, live at the Manchester Evening News Arena.
So the UFC contacted me back then. Remember Marshall? Marshall's obviously remember Marshall, great guy.
Marshall was a great friend to me. Awesome guy.
He's a good guy. I seen him last year. He actually came to the New York event. He caught up with Dave Lewis and actually ran into him there. And we sat down and was saying about this kind of thing. You know, it's crazy how everything's worked out. So the UFC contacted me in 2007 and they asked me, you know, you ready? You'll come and referee on the show, Manchester, when they were coming back to Spearhead. And it got to the Monday before the event. And then they called me and said, we can't use you. And I was like, why? And he kind of thing like, if you don't have something, you won't miss it. I was gutted a bit. But they said, are you still competing? It's a problem. And I was like, all right, okay, I get that. So it actually was going to be UFC. What did you say, UFC 70 or 75?
Yeah, 70.
So I would have made my debut at UFC 70, but then I finished off. I went down to light heavy. I remained undefeated at light heavy. I had my last fight. I made my last fight in 2008, and then I made my debut for the UFC as a referee in UFC 89, Birmingham. You fought Chris Lieben.
Main event, me versus Chris Lieben. That is correct.
And that's so 16, coming on to my 17th year now with the UFC. Goes to show how long you've been with them as well. But it's just all, like I said, once I started with them, that's when I kind of like, you know, because they open the door for everything and for everyone. And I try and get that across, you know, with the UFC. I can't be, for what they've done for me as a person, professionally, like, you know, I can't put into words, you know, how thankful I am, the gratitudes. Nobody would have a clue who I was, good or bad, you know. Yeah. But so, yeah, 2008, UFC 89 Birmingham, that was the first foray into them. And then look what's happened since.
Yeah, no, it's incredible, Mark. And you work extremely hard. And I know how seriously you take this sport, and you have a program coaching a lot of people. We'll get into that stuff in a minute. Here's how I know you take your job seriously. As I said, me and you have always had a great relationship. And then, but when you became a referee, you were putting your job, not putting my friendship second, but you were like, Michael, if I'm refereeing, I can't talk to you. I can't hang out with you. I can't be seen, you know, palling up with you and sitting with you in restaurants if I'm going to be refereeing fights, because it would seem like you're being, you know, you're making calls in my favor and things like that. And I was like, of course, totally get it, totally understand. As I said, that just always impressed me, as opposed to being offended or anything like that. I was like, no, this guy takes his job extremely seriously and gives the sport the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, mate. No, appreciate exactly that. It's just got, like, you know, professional distance. You know, it's like, obviously me and you would have the relationship as friends and we trained together and stuff in the past. And then But then, like, it kind of took a stage further. It came out in an interview last year. Excuse me. A lot of people said to me, why have you never, I said, you'll never see me referee Leon Edwards in the UFC. Why? Because I was his first coach. A lot of people did when he first, this is way, I've explained it before, way back when he first walked into the gym as a raw novice. But even, even as small and tedious as the link is, common sense and experience tells you, look, just let it go. But I've always had, especially, yourself, mate, we've all grown up with this scene together. Everybody knows everyone, especially in and around Europe. Everybody knows. You may have been in the gym, trained, etc. You're always going to cross paths to a certain degree. But, for me, it was about, if I was going to take the job serious, I was going to take it serious. And I've always said to people, like, as a referee, you're never off duty. Sounds dramatic, but it's not like, I might see you like when you were competing, I might see you at events, you'd walk into the hotel bar, you might be, of course, we're going to speak to each other, but
of course,
people aren't going to see us out having dinner, or the same with any fight. You just have to have a bit of a common sense mindset on things.
Professional distance. I like the way you put that. But sometimes, of course, you were my referee, and sometimes I caused some drama for you, so I apologize. Was it the Jorge Rivera fight? Were you the referee for that one?
In Australia. The favourite memory of that fight. Forget everybody know what happened with yourself, but here's the thing. Do you remember your boxing coach at the top? Was it Kinney?
Mark Kinney, legend.
Mark Kinney so obviously the guys know that when the corners go in, they kick you out with all the stuff, don't they? So Kinney had one of the UFC baseball hats on, and of course it was brand new out the cap, so the peak's like super out here, super stiff. As all this kerfuffle's kicking off, I'm seeing him like going up to Dana. He's trying to talk in Dana's ear, but every time he goes up, the peak of the hat's fucking he's trying to say to him, like, in the broad scout, broad Scouse accent to get him off. Fuck, tell him this, tell him that. But every time he'd go up to somebody, he'd end up headbutting them with the peak of the hat. But mate, listen, like you said, there's 101. I've got to get all these things down into a book just to share everything that I've been part of and seen and saw over the years, because that's what people like. People like the stuff that anyone can watch a fight. They like access to things that they may not have seen or heard about, and just like a fly on the wall account, if you know what I mean.
No, of course, mate. The memoirs of Marc Goddard. That'd be a good read, actually. And for anyone, if they don't know Mark Kinney, which of course people don't, he's one of the most intense individuals as well. And he was going off, as you say, he was headbutting Dana slightly. I remember back in the dressing room, he was saying, I was telling Dana, this guy talked about our country and this, and Dana was like, so what? So what? But Mark was so pissed off and so mad. Anyway, Mark, that was a long time ago. Current day, you're flying all over the world. You're one of the top referees in the sport. It seems that every event, there's always people that bitch and complain online. I'm the victim of it as a commentator. People are always accusing me of being biased towards English fighters or people that I'm friends with. And I actually think it's the other way. I think when it's a UK guy, most of the time I go the other way and I'm a bit more critical because I'm trying to, subconsciously, outweigh that perspective that people might have. What are some of the most common complaints that you see online about refereeing and officiating in general?
I mean, look, it's part and parcel of it, mate. Like I said, you get your fighters get their fair share, commentary get their fair share. Listen, a referee by nature, regardless of the sport, is going to get it in the neck, and that's just the way it is. Obviously, 20 years ago, we didn't have these, there wasn't instant access. If somebody wanted to say something bad or call you a prick, they would have to approach you in the street, or what they're going to do, write a letter and post it to you. That's just not going to happen. You've just got to see past it, mate. And it's like, sometimes, like, I've learned a lot over the past 20 years as a ref. I've learned a lot that I tried before to when I say entertain, I mean, you can't. It's like an abyss. You're trying to explain to people, and what you'll find invariably are these people. They don't want to be. They don't want an explanation, you know.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with. There's a. It's not even a fine line, you know. It's a very great bold line. If somebody wants to critique or criticize you, so be it. That's the way it goes, you know. We're human beings. Nobody should be beyond reproach, and that's fine. A lot of the times, the people that criticize, they don't even know the rules themselves. But you got to let them say their thing. They may not agree with you. That's cool. That's human nature. Hop on the other side of the fence, the other side of the coin. The bit that you're not paid to do, the bit that you're not paid to accept, is the abuse, and that's a different thing. And like, it's easy to, you know, like you said, you just kind of, you turn a blind eye, you wash it out, because you kind of like, even if you notice something or you talk to someone back, and I think invariably that's what people want, you know. They want to be, he noticed me, you know.
They always want a reaction.
Yeah, and then they've kind of won. And here's the thing I say, I'll ask anyone, you know, with social media, whatever you do for a job, when you finish your job and you go home, do you go to the court of public opinion and find out if you've had a good day? Well, me neither, you know, me neither. If I've done something that wasn't right or wasn't correct, no one will know faster than me, you know. Nobody holds myself, you know me as a person, nobody holds me firmer to account than me myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If I've zigged when I should have zagged or made a mistake, etc., that's cool. And I'll try and explain this when I do the seminars for training referees and judges. Obviously, it's part and part. The thing for us, Mike, is we have a comparison. Like, we knew life without social media, so we have a direct 50, you know, black and white, you know, A and B. We can see what it used to be like, nostalgia, call it what you want. A lot of the younger generation, obviously, like our kids and stuff, they don't have the comparison. So this and stuff like this is completely normalized to them. I don't mean getting online and abusing people. What I mean is instant, you know, access, notification, gratification, call it what you may. And I think that's something that psychologically that's what makes it a little bit tougher for us, because we come from an old school setting, or a moment in time when we knew life without. You just sat at home casually with your family and you pick up your phone. Oh, this guy's called me a wanker. Oh, okay. Not that. 20 years ago, that wasn't going to happen. You know what I mean?
Well, the Marc Goddard that I knew from 20 years ago, that would have been an issue.
yeah, I know, but you got to learn to, 50 years old now, mate. I've got this far. I'm not saying, and here's the thing I say to people, you know yourself, I'm sure I've got 1,001 detractors, but I've never met one.
Yeah. Well, that's just the way it goes.
I've never met one. And I think that most fans, mate, and I'm still convinced, because if you're negative online, if you're in a rush to say something bad online, I firmly believe that's the vast majority of people. The vast majority of people are just happy getting on with that's why it seems that when you go online, there's a deluge of negativity. Don't get put off by that. I believe that the vast majority of people, they're just normal, everyday, respectful living people that don't want to say anything bad about them, but they don't have to go online to prove that. Just be a good person, but don't waste time proving it.
Yeah, it's a crazy state of affairs, because I can genuinely say I don't think I've ever I've never seen someone's post and then gone on there and left a really negative, hurtful comment. I think that says more about the person themselves. Anyway, you mentioned there about the judging and the officiating in general, and that a lot of people do have a lot of misconceptions or just don't understand. From your perspective, what are some of the biggest biggest things that people don't understand about judging, about refereeing, about officiating, about the rule sets? Because it's very, very complicated. I often I've done it once. We go to seminars with the Athletic Commission, and even still then, after being involved in the sport for so long, I was still learning things. What are some of the biggest flaws that people have when they're watching a fight in terms of understanding what they're actually watching?
All of the above. You've kind of touched on it there, mate. The biggest thing is misconception, misunderstanding. And look, you know yourself, like, you go to a football match, right? Or you go to a pub on a Saturday night, there's 100 Jose Mourinho's or Alex Ferguson's at the bar, right? Everybody's an expert, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to fights, a lot of people think they can be a ref. Trust me, they think they can be a ref. Everybody thinks they can be a judge, you know, and that's
yeah.
You got to, like I said, the UFC have done. You know, they're a big, powerful animal. You know, from a media perspective, a very powerful beast, and they can get a lot of stuff. Like yourself, you and your fellow commentary team, you guys are very powerful because you literally have the mic and you're putting it out to the audience and down the ears. And I must say that over the last couple of years, the stuff that's coming out there, it's getting better and better all the time, I believe, you know, little bits of information. And look, mate, you can't, it's unrealistic to think that there's 20,000 understood officials in a stadium watching a fight. That's not their job. That's our job, you know. It's fighting. It's emotional. A lot of people, another thing people don't realize is, like, when we get abuse and we see this abuse, the first thing I'm going to ask is, how much did you lose? Because gambling invokes a different level of, especially for us, if somebody's parlay, you know, I always used to say, like, when I'm refereeing, I don't care about your $60 parlay, mate. What I care about is doing my job right. So a lot of the time when you'll see a lot of, especially when it comes to hate and spiteful things, not people asking you a genuine question, which is cool, but if people are coming out with hate and spite, again, you know, like I said, it's just, it's because they've lost money. So they're on a different level of emotion. But yeah, look, I think the biggest misconception is definitely when it comes to judging. And not, well, I'm going to put that twofold. Number one, obviously, on what the set criteria is. And I say to people, like, they think just because they saw at the beginning of a UFC on the graphic, you know, effective striking, grappling, there's a big difference between reading something and understanding something. Yes, you may see a few bullet point headers, but there is so much depth and detail behind that. It's remarkable. You'll know yourself from the work you've put in trying to understand. And I can tell you this, when I speak on behalf of my fellow officials and especially the judges at the top, these are some of the most invested, conscientious, contributable people, and the sport's lucky to have them. You know what I mean? You need to understand that.
Yeah, I want to jump in and say here, because a lot of people watching this, because there is a lot of people that have issues, you know, I experience it as well. And because I'm a UFC commentator and because you are a UFC referee, they probably think this is just me sitting here. What's the term they use? Oiling you up and stuff like that.
Blowing smoke.
Yeah, blowing smoke up your ass, oiling you up, whatever the case may be. But I agree, Mark, because I see all your colleagues backstage and they care about it so much, and they'll often come up to myself, you know, Joey Beltram, Mike Belgium, pardon me, Mark Smith, the list goes on, and they'll come and explain why they made a call, this and that, and they'll even say, what do you think, did you agree? And they'll have a dialogue about it because they genuinely care, you know. So to think that you guys are just haphazard and making calls is fucking crazy, if I'm brutally honest. But what are some of the biggest ones, though? What are some of the biggest errors that people don't get about the rule set?
Well, I mean, from the rule set, it's actually they've got quite a bit better, because it's, as a referee, you know, it's hard and fast because there's a set list of, you know, there's a unified rules. You know what you can't do. I know I can't kick you in the face when I'm lying on my back. I know I can't pull your hair. I know I can't headbutt you. And there's things there that even an untrained person can see. So like I said, with the referees, and I may say this to my fellow officials, judges, yes, on the face of it, we may have a harder job because it's a one-man show when you're in there by yourself. But I think for us, it's a little bit easier because the rule book is more defined. You can do this, you cannot do this. When it comes to the judging side, yes, we have an envelope set of clear and defined criteria, but there is always going to be an element of subjectivity. It can't be a perfect science. That's why there's 3 judges and 3 different vantage points. An arena is a big place. The octagon can be 32 feet across. You might have saw something that I didn't see. You may have heard something that I didn't see from a fighter being hurt, etc. It's just the subtle nuances when it comes to what these guys are putting, you know, especially the judges, because I think they get more, we get our fair share of hate, of course, but You know, the
Judges
judging
do get a lot of shit because a lot of the judges, I mean, some of the judging's crazy, Mark. We'll get to that in a bit, and I think we should have 5, but we'll get to that. Sorry to interrupt.
No. That's a good. I'm going to hold you. I'm going to challenge you to that point.
No. Yeah. Okay. No, please. I've got to mention this before I forget because I've got a bloody ADH mind all over the place. I genuinely don't know if you were the referee or not, and I hope you weren't. But maybe you could. I'm sure a lot of people would be interested. You know when Sean O'Malley and Merab Dvalishvili fought? Were you the ref or not?
No, it was Herb.
Right, okay. And, you know, there was a lot of talk going on, and then Herb got involved and he was separating them and talking them. What was going on there from the referee's perspective? Like, for example, this is a thing, like an example of things that I'm not fully educated on, and I know a lot of people watching on.
Good example. So, like I said, it comes back to what I'm saying. From a referee, it's on, off, A, B, hard and defined rule set. Now, one of the rules that covers there is the corners. People don't understand this. A lot of people don't understand. When it comes fight time, the corners, the coaches of the fighter are under exactly the same jurisdiction as the fighter from a referee's perspective. And one of the specified, specific written rules is no interference from a mixed martial artist corner or seconds. That means that when a coach is there, of course you are there to coach your fighter, no one else. You're not there to talk to us. You're not there to certainly talk or shout into the opposition. So it's very clear and defined. And I think what had happened, you saw in that fight, because it was a misconception, and obviously Sean's coach, Tim Welsh.
Yeah, Tim Welsh.
Tim, always had positive interaction with him. And it's funny because a lot of people ask me the same thing. When Sean O'Malley fought Aljo in Boston, I was the ref. And then you'll see at the end of the first round, as they're going out, I actually turned to Sean and say to him, don't do that. Because as he was leaving, he was talking. He wasn't being derogatory or anything, but he was, games.
You mean Tim? Tim was talking to Aljo?
Tim was talking to Aljo, and I went, don't do that. You can't do that. And it's actually a defined foul, like I said, interference from a competitor's or mixed martial arts or second. It's a very clear and defined. It's a foul. So if a coach is actually being derogatory or they're talking into your opposition, a referee's it's within our power, in our jurisdiction, to actually call a halt to that. What had happened I think what you'd seen happen in the Merab and Sean fight is that Merab had heard Tim calling into him, and then he was trying to get Herb's attention. Herb was saying, concentrate on the fight, let me deal with that. But yes, to put a fine point on it, a corner cannot. That's why you'll see us as well. Another little thing, we're on a roll now. Someone was asking me,
please.
When we call timeout, so when a corner, you'll always see us, drives me crazy actually. It's one of my pet peeves, because a referee needs to keep control. So if someone was hit in the groin or, poked in the eye or an illegal shot, when we send the fouler off to a neutral corner, there is no coaching. At that point, coaching ceases. And people say, why? Well, it's fairly obvious when you think about it. If I've got a guy on the floor writhing around in pain because he was accidentally fouled or whatever it is, and then his opposition manages to go and sit down in his corner, potentially get some game-winning advice. That's why we don't allow. Exactly. That's why we don't allow coaching during a timeout for both corners, not just the fouler or the foulee. It's for both. But I'm always quite hot on that. You'll see whenever I direct a fighter away from the fouled contestant, always saying to the corner guys, please, no coaching. And you should have the commission guys out there that sit behind them. They're there to back us up and help them too. You'll see them put the hand on their shoulder. They're always trying to keep them down in the chairs, and they may lean into them and say, guys, please, you can't coach during a timeout.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Stoppages, stopping a fight, Mark. Obviously, you were a fighter yourself. You know, this is one of the hardest things. Well, not the hardest things, but you know what I'm saying. It's final. There's no undoing this, and you know the ramifications it has for both guys involved. But people are always quick to criticize, and I know it's a hard job. It's split second. What are you specifically looking for? I know it's, you know, you got to be intelligently defending yourself and all the basic stuff that people will know, but you're there sometimes 2-3 feet away. What are you specifically looking for before you decide to step in and stop the fight? Or if someone hits the canvas hard?
Yeah, I mean, to try and keep it as finite and concisely as possible, it's pretty simple. If I'm going to step in to stop the fight, what I'm believing in my mind at that specified time is that the fighter is in a unreasonable position to further protect himself. Now, if a fighter's laid out unconscious, it's very obvious that it goes without saying. But it's always the wavering argument or the wavering misunderstanding, if you like, is on the TKO when it's a technical knockout. And obviously the definition is there is quite defined, because if we say if a fighter was KO'd unconscious, a fighter cannot intelligently defend themselves. If a fighter was hurt and they're covering up and we think it's the beginning of the end, we say that a fighter is not intelligently defending themselves. Yeah. So listen, mate, like I was saying the other day, my utopia, I never want to stop a fight. I would love to go into every fight, let it go 3 rounds or 5 rounds. The judges do their job or blah, 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 blah. But guess what? That's not the world in which we live. You know, when I'm there and I'm specifically looking for, obviously the level of fighters is a thing. I'm not going to treat first-time pros or raw amateurs, novices, the same as I'm going to treat somebody fighting for a world championship contest, further to people's popular misconception. I'm just there to make sure at that precise moment, I think that the fighter has got out. And my job is they're in deep water, you know, and they're going to go under, they're going to come back up. They're going to go under, they're going to come back up. If I think that they've gone under for the final time and they're not going to be in a position to be able to get themselves back, I'm there to do my job. I'm going to pull you out and I'm going to keep you to safety. And I know how many fighters, mate, you'll know yourself, even though you never said this, I never heard you say it. And it's very common for a fighter to say, you know, don't stop my fight. And I always say the same thing. Look,
I think I have said it backstage. I think maybe not to you. Well, in fact, I know I have. I've said, don't worry about me, mate. And they're like, well, listen, if you're not defending yourself, I'm like, don't worry about me. You worry about the other guy.
Of course, it's actually a mindset, right?
They roll their eyes and like, okay, tough guy, you know.
Yeah, but that's what you have to have, that mindset. And here's the thing, Mike, think of it like this. And I say, look, there's a very obvious reason why you have a fucking referee, not just to adhere to the rules. Because you know yourself, when a fighter is hurt, truly hurt, they don't know the hurt. That's why we're there. They don't know where they are. A lot of times when they're they may not have been cleaned out or knocked out cold. They're out on their feet, or they're on the floor. When you see specific things, there's little subtle nuances. Like if a fight, you know yourself in a fight, mate, getting hit is not very pleasant, okay? Getting hit when you can see it coming is not very nice. When you can't see it coming, it's even worse. Number one, you think there's more than the fighter hitting you. You think there's a fucking ref hitting me too. It's not a good place. When you can't see what's coming at you, you're in a worse spot. You know, everything is amplified. And I'll always say the same thing to a fighter regardless. It's the last thing I say to them in the dressing room. And I say to them this: if I believe you're in trouble, if I believe you're compromised or hurt, please just do one thing for me. Keep turning and looking for your opponent. Because then I understand 2 things. Number one, you're hurt, but you still know what's happening. And number 2, more importantly, I know you still want to be in the fight. Because you know yourself, Mike, sometimes a fighter, they may capitulate or they get overwhelmed in a fight. And when they do things like, goes back to what I'm saying about when you see things coming at you, when you're being hit, it's not a very nice feeling. But you're bracing yourself, you're there, you can see what's happening. When you can't see what's happening, like I said, things become amplified, and a lot of fighters are giving you it's like a subtle hint that they want out of there. And I can see it. And it's not quitting, okay? I don't care what anyone says.
No, and what you're saying, it's subconscious as well.
Yes, it's fetal. It's almost like I said, when I say to a fighter, I said, if I can recognize, I said, if you cover up, if I can't see you, I can't read you. But if I can see what you are doing constantly to make a bad position good, I'm going to give you every fight to stay in the fight. If your back's turned and you can't see things coming, yeah, I'm on the cusp of making a call. And please believe that I'm not just doing it obviously I'm making it cognitively from my mind, but it's coming from my heart as well. I'm doing to the best of my ability and experience. I think you're compromised. And it's the difference between, think of it like this, mate, without me waffling on. Imagine, right, as a referee, I could all too easily, when it comes to that, I'll just take a step back and I'll just stand there until somebody's in a crumpled heap on the floor. Okay. Selfishly, I could do that thinking, well, no one's ever going to have a go at me, or no one's ever going to say to me about an early stoppage. I can't do that. That's not in my makeup, because I believe I've failed in my level 1 duty and responsibility as a ref. When you're not looking at your opponent, you've been cognitively knocked down or you're hurt at that point. I need to make my call, and I'm doing so from the best possible place. And it could make the difference between you having a TKO with a 28-day or 30 suspension, or you're being KO'd out cold with a fractured jaw. And I know all these things could happen at any point in the fight, but I'm just there to make a finite call when I'm convinced that you can't make it for yourself.
That's actually such a great point, Mark, because we know, as trained martial artists, the number one rule is you never turn your back on your opponent. Even doing spinning back kicks and things like that is kind of dangerous and risky, but you never turn your back. You've always got to be looking at your opponent. And if you're face down and you're taking shots, then of course, I've never thought of it like that. My mind instantly went to, and I don't know if you were the ref or not, I feel like you might have been, Curtis Blades versus Tom Aspinall in London. Yes. Yeah, but I mean, does that kind of exemplify what you're talking about there? Because Curtis went down, he was face first, and Tom, obviously being as quick and powerful as he is, hit him with like 4 or 5 shots, and then boom, it was done.
Kind of, yeah, it's a good example.
And again, I'm not trying to grease you up or whatever, but you're speaking a lot of sense.
And here's the thing, thank you, mate. I hope I am. I'm trying to get when that happened. Honestly, like Curtis, but I have a lot of respect for him. Such a lovely guy. Dangerous big beast of a fella that he is, but he's such a lovely guy. And in previous fights before, he's actually came to me, all the things people don't, he actually came to me, before in a prior fight and said, thank you, thanks for looking after me. And it means the world to me when they say that. It's the same as when you go into the locker room and the fighter or the corner see you and, oh, thank God, it means the world to me. But yes, like that's a good example. You've got, and obviously it's expressive. It's more conducive to what you're saying. It's heavyweights. There's a lot of power there, a lot of weight. Tom is a very agile and fast, hard hitter. So is Curtis, but Curtis was the one in a disadvantaged position. You see, when he got knocked down, then he actually went flat momentarily for a second. Yeah. And then I'm thinking, goes back to what I said a minute ago. Selfishly, I'm scared about what Johnny Bishbash49 on Twitter is going to say about me. No, fuck that. I'm going to do my job. Because if I did stand back and then I watched somebody get separated out cold unnecessarily, I don't sleep well at night. Yeah. If I think I could have prevented that, and people say, oh, of course it's a fight and bad things can happen. We all know the inherent risks of what combat sports can bring. But a competent, considered official, when I'm doing my job, like I said, that word protection, I'm on that. I want to give you as much leeway as possible, but if you're left in an unconscious crumpled heap on the floor because I thought I may have took a backward step or a sideways step even, I feel I would have failed in my duty as a referee.
Consistency with what referees say backstage and what they do in the octagon. I don't have any examples, but I had Eric Nixick on my podcast on last Monday, and he didn't mention anyone in particular. So this is not directed at you, Mark, not in any way, but we were talking about, the sport in general. And I was like, what's one of your biggest issues? And he said just that. He said the consistency from what referees tell us, say, we'll give you a warning, or then we'll take a point or whatever. And then in the cage, they see somebody committing the same foul 2 or 3 times and not taking a point. And I guess this kind of leads me into my next question as well, which is going to be about eye pokes, because eye pokes are a big issue in the sport. And I know the UFC tried to change the gloves to prevent them and things. The rule is the fingers have got to be up. They can't be like that that and all the rest of it. I think that's just a stupid rule. I think the fingers need to be bent at all times. But what would your answer to that be, firstly, about inconsistency between what referees say backstage and what actually happens inside the octagon? I mean, I know it's hard without any specific example.
No, that's cool. Because, I mean, when it comes to, I'll talk about myself, I'm not at liberty to talk about, I don't know who specifically he may or may not be referring to. But yes, of course, that's why I'm quite specific in what I say. And I've kind of, I've altered it a little bit over the years. But I'm very specific, on what I say. I'd like to think that I do what I say when I tell a fighter, and like, hopefully now I've elaborated on it a little bit more in this conversation. Because what it's like, mate. Sometimes when you go and speak to a fighter backstage, the last thing you want to do, you're 20 minutes away from the fight of your fucking life. Do you want someone coming in lecturing rules to you? Not necessarily. Some fighters are really cool and comfortable with it, but it's not a one size fits all. I do not expect a fighter cognitively to remember everything I've told him when it comes to the fight. Now, you could argue there, it's a good point you made there about Eric. I've always had a good relationship with Eric Nixick and the fighters from the gym, is I will never talk to a fighter alone, ever. I will always make sure that at least, invariably, it's the head coach, but I will never talk to a fighter alone for the reasons I've just stated. The guy, it's like your mind. You're all over the place. Some can be like a box of frogs. Some can be super chilled. But how selfish would that be of me to expect a fighter all amped up and, trying to suppress adrenaline to cognitively remember everything I've tried to say to them. So I like to have that final instruction discussion in the presence of a head coach. And then hopefully then it will corroborate with what I do once I go into the octagon. That's my ultimate goal. And I'll say to them, look, guys, I don't want to say a single word during this fight. I don't decide that. You and your opponent do.
Yeah. The eye pokes. I think they should make a rule where it's you poke someone in the eye, you're losing a point, or maybe half a point. That was a suggestion I heard recently, bringing a 0.5 system where it's not quite as dramatic. But I think if it was to be, look, listen, I know accidents happen. We've both done martial arts for years, and your fingers are exposed, so that shit happens. But sometimes people are like this. I think the hands should be made to be bent kind of like this at all times. You can still parry jabs, you can still grab, doesn't have to be a hard fist. But this rule here, pointing up at the ceiling, I think is kind of crazy because you're going to get eye poke still. An eye poke is like kind of a really bad thing, unfortunate thing to happen to a fighter. And if people know that you're going to lose a point, simple as that, I think we see eye pokes drop dramatically overnight.
I understand you. I get the level of emotion where you're coming from with this. I do. I understand, mate. But invariably, like you said, I try and explain to people that I'm very pragmatic as a person. Obviously, I've learned to hone that many years being a ref. So when someone runs at you, okay, if somebody's coming forward at you, are you ever going to do this with your fists? Or your hands have to be open at some point.
You're going to try and grab.
Of course.
Unless you're striking. If you're trying to clinch.
Unless you're slipping and throwing a shot straight through, yes. But invariably, when guys are running to or they're throwing a combination, I'm trying to parry or reach out, it's hard cognitively. It's the same in boxing. Boxers' hands are open every time. They're just closed at the moment, but you can't see it because it's an enclosed glove, obviously.
From water to stone. As
there you go.
Said, come on.
Moment of impact, then the fist closes when you turn it over. And I get it. I think that the biggest deterrent here, I know what you're saying about point deductions. I can touch on that in a minute. Also wanted to come back to your point about 5 judges. The biggest deterrent, I think the easiest, prevention is better than cure. So I think that with the glove, having a pre-stitched curve in the glove seems to be the easiest fix for me. I used to do it when I worked with the International Federation, the amateurs. We'd have 500 kids for a week, all the youngsters fighting, and eye pokes were very few and far between. Yourself sometimes if you have that glove, once you've had your hands wrapped, sometimes it's quite hard to actually keep your hand closed, right? Even so.
Yeah. People don't realize it. It's very, very tight in there.
Exactly. So if you're, that's another point. So if someone's rushing at you and you're in defensive mode, your hand is springing open. You're not doing that intentionally. You're I can tell you this, mate. In 20 years, 25 years of MMA, 20 years as an official, I saw someone attack the eyes with their fingers probably twice intentionally, you know?
And I agree. I agree. I don't think people are doing it intentional because
you want a stronger
the whole is bloody watching, okay? And if people see, no one's doing that. And I'd rather land a punch than an eye poke anyway. If you can poke someone in the eye, you can probably land a shot. However, we've got to be responsible for our weapons. I think it would just send. And again, I'm not saying I'm right or anything like that because you bring up some very good points. But I think if people just know there is much more drastic, dire consequences, they'll be like, okay, well, shit, I can't afford to make this foul by accident.
It's a fair point, mate. Like I said, I understand the level that you're coming from. But when it comes to point deductions as well, a lot of things that people won't consider is obviously, look, in a 3-round fight, a point deduction, it's not like boxing where you've got 8, 9, 10, 11 rounds to make it up. Yeah. In a 3-round fight and you lose a point, and that's not just look, because if I think a fighter has been flagrant or definitely malicious, there's a big difference there between as well. People, why didn't you take a point in that fight? Crazy things happen in fights. Our job is to determine a fighter can be reckless, but not necessarily malicious. They can be careless without being flagrant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense, Mark.
I'm trying to take these things into account. It's like, people, I'll take a point straight away. We get enough flack. If a fighter comes out on the wrong end of a decision or we've stopped the fight and then they want to come at us, you lost me money, da-da-da-da. Now, if you put that down on me, it's like with the old Pride system. Pride used to have cards. And if you brandished a yellow card in Pride, a lot of people didn't understand. They incurred a financial penalty. Fuck, that's the last place I want to be as a referee. Yeah, actually, my decision. You know what I mean?
20% of the purse gone.
Yeah, because I brandished a yellow card. But look, infractions and point deductions are there. And sometimes you can be excessively reckless. You don't have to be malicious to have a point taken straight away. You can be careless and reckless and have a point deducted. I'm not saying that. But obviously when it comes to like low blows and stuff, all the things that are inherent and people grabbing that's one of the things that drives me crazy as a referee. As soon as you see someone's hand go flat on the cage, people say to me, what do you do for a job? Well, I travel the world to get shouted at every week in different languages. People are screaming at me. And when you ever see someone's hand go to the fence, they're not grabbing the fence. There's a distinct difference. My fingers can go through the fence naturally. If I'm curling my hand and closing my fist, that's a different thing as well. That's a cognitive decision.
This is a new one that pisses me off. This fucking pisses me off, and the refs are always going on about it. It never existed back in my day, right? The toes in the cage, right? We use the cage and our feet to push off. And as you said, sometimes the hand and the feet, we can manipulate our bodies. We can push off the cage with our feet. We can escape mounts like that. We use our feet to walk up, and you can reverse position from mount and stuff like that. There's a lot of nifty little tricks you can do with the cage, right? But then I see toes out the cage, toes out the cage. Your toes are way shorter than your fingers. They don't have the same dexterity. Please, for the love of God, try and fucking explain that one, because I see referees get on the high horse about it all the time. And I want to scream from the commentary booth, shut the fuck up. It's a little toe gone between the fucking fence.
Allow me to then. And I get what you're saying. Again, understand your emotion, understand where you're coming from. You said that fingers are shorter. Invariably, they are. But we're all come in different shapes and sizes. Mate, listen, I've saw people's feet. I'm convinced they can fucking play the piano with their feet. Okay?
Mate, if you saw my toes, well, you might have saw them in Scotland when I fought Tally's Lighties. It was falling to bits. It was the front page of the fucking Sun newspaper. My feet are disgusting. They're stubbed. They're messed up. They're broken. They go sideways. I can't do shit with my toes. So maybe go on, carry on.
Some people can, but some people can. So like you said, pushing in the same way as I do with my hand. I can fall flat on the cage with my hand. People are going to scream holding it. No. They're not. It's the same with the feet. I can wall walk. I can use it to push. But if somebody is in a position, you'll see if they're lying parallel with the cage, they throw their feet up and then they'll hook. They will definitely and definitively hook with their toes. They're gaining traction and they'll reverse the position. That's a foul. That's something that I have to come in with.
But maybe that's also because there's a hole in the fence. They're not necessarily meaning to go through it, but it's not a wall. Do you know what I'm saying? So there's a bit of
I know what you're saying. Or someone goes for an arm lock. I've saw someone goes for an arm lock against the cage, and they swing over for the arm lock, and like part of initial defense is I can just try and swim back through to get the shoulder through. So I square up the hips. If they roll over into an arm lock and I hook with my toes, I can no longer do that. So I'm holding the position artificially. There's little subtleties like that.
Yeah.
I know it may be annoying, and I know it's not something that happens a lot, but if somebody uses that, like I said, some people are very dexterous with their, I said about playing the piano. It's annoying. I know it can be annoying, but it's a rare occurrence. But it's still, under the unified rules, fingers and toes are treated the same in that respect.
Got to wash your fingers and toes, boys and girls. All right, so let's get into some of the officiating stuff. Here's one of my big things, or a big change that I would like to see. More 10-7 rounds scored. And I'll explain why. Because I think in Paris, for example, Renato Moicano versus Benoit Saint-Denis, and I know you're not a judge, the opening round was a 10-7 round. He almost murdered him, almost finished him. It was a one-sided beatdown for the duration of the round. The 3Ds, damage, duration, and domination. Damage, duration, domination. That's what the criteria they use under the new kind of officiating guidelines. I've got the verbiage from it. We sat down, we had a seminar with the Athletic Commission from Las Vegas, and they went through it all. They had judge fights and all kinds of stuff. I think a 10-7 round is so important because under their specific guidelines, a 10-9 round is where it's essentially pretty even, but one guy lands one or two more blows. That's a 10-9. A 10-8 round is where one guy clearly wins the round. And I think a 10-7 round, as I said, is when someone batters the other one from pillar to post throughout the duration. That's important because often you'll see a round one and a round two where it's really close, but one guy wins 2 10-9s. Okay. And maybe there's not a lot happening. There's, the clinching up against the fence for the duration or whatever. But then in the third round, someone goes out, they put an absolute beat down on them, and then the fight becomes a draw. But then at the end, when they raise the hand, one guy's black and blue with half his face hanging off him, and the other person is kind of okay, and he's taking a few knees to the thigh whilst getting pushed up against the fence and stuff. That to me signifies a clear winner of that fight. What would you say to that, Mark? Let's go. Come on, put me in my place, you prick.
I'm gonna, and it's one of the fights I use specifically. You said, of course, I'm a judge, Mike. I train judges, teach judges, and one of my favorite fights to use as in the exam in the classroom is you versus Anderson Silva. Now,
let's fucking go. I knew I had to come into this somewhere. Let's talk about me.
There you go. He didn't set this up, by the way.
No, I didn't.
At the end of the fight, you look like you've been fucking run over. You look like you've been hit by. You look like you've been hit by a bus. Your face is a mess. You've got an ungodly cut. Everything. Take an average guy off the street and go, these two guys had a fight. He won. What? He won. Your face looked at that. Under the unified one there, you won that fight 3 rounds to 2. Period. Every day of the week, twice on a Sunday. The 3 judges on the night said the same thing. They were all correct. I use that as a specific example. Sometimes the person who looks like they've been in a horror show was in a horror show, but it's not always the case. And I'm going to use that fight as a perfect personal example to you. If we judged on visible damage, okay, if we judged it on that alone, and obviously we know that when it comes to fight, it's 3 separate fights essentially, or 5 separate fights. It's round by round. By the time that score's gone, it's been and done. But if you look at that fight, I think you're thinking different now, right?
No,
You
no,
look
no,
at
no, no. I'm not
You look
thinking
at that
different at
fight,
all.
mate. You were so bust up, and like I said, you were so
Yeah.
But you won the fight.
But yeah, no, 100%. But they were still competitive rounds. I mean, in round 3, he dropped me with that knee right as the buzzer went, which
Yeah.
pisses me off because people think that, Jesus Christ, he was knocked out. I wasn't knocked out.
You weren't knocked out. You were knocked down.
I was talking to Herb Dean.
You were knocked down.
Yeah, and then I think it was round 5. He had some good shots as well, which opened me up. But I'm talking about where one person for 5 minutes batters the other person from start to finish and can't defend himself and just on the floor and getting smashed about. And the referee's like, fight back on several occasions. That's got to be a 10-7 round.
But it depends, mate. You said that you in your head, you thought that Moicano and RDA was a 10-7. Okay, I don't.
No, Moicano and Benoit Saint-Denis.
Oh, sorry, Moicano. Sorry. Who did I say?
RDA.
Oh, God, yeah. I ref that fight too. You remember that when he came out at the end of the 5th, beginning of the 5th, and I said to him, 30 seconds, turn this around. Then he came out and he won the 5th.
I'm talking about Benoit Saint-Denis. It was a very different fight.
But here's the thing with like you said, with a scoring system. Do I think it's perfect? No, I don't. I think it's in as good a place now as it ever has been. Does that mean that we stop and we become complacent? No, it doesn't. You touched upon it earlier. You mentioned a half point. I think that's a logical step. There was an experiment of many years ago in the USA around rewatching fights with a half point, and they actually came up with the fact that it didn't make that much of a difference. But I think now with the place we are, the criteria, and the point I'm making is this. You said about a 10-9 could be a one-punch difference. Yeah, you're right. But it could also be quite a wide margin. Not enough to tip it into a 10-8. So you have a 10-9. You could have a super focused, competent judge, and he's like, one punch, that was that body shot, I seen it dug in, I could hear in that. Then you have as wide a margin as you can with a 10-9, but we still have to give it the same points. Is that fair? Probably not. I think if you look into the attributed scores and we put more, think of it as like more markers on a ruler. If we have 9.5, 8.5, 7.5, it means that we're going to start expanding upon the criteria, but I think we're in a better place. I think that more markers on the ruler, if that makes sense. If I break a piece of glass, Mike, and I have to go to the shop to get it replaced, and I say it's 97.5 inches, and he says we only do round numbers, you're just a little bit out.
Can I read what I have here, which was emailed to us? It says, a 10-9 round. A 10-9 round in MMA is the most common score that a judge assesses during the fight. If during the round the referee sees a fighter and the better striker, if the judge sees a fighter and the better striker or utilize effective grappling during the competition, even if just by one technique over their opponent, the judge shall give the winning fighter a score of 10 while assessing the losing fighter a score of 9 or less. It's imperative that judges understand that a score of 9 is not an automatic numerical score given to the losing fighter of the round. The judge must consider, was the fighter engaged in offensive actions during the round? Did the losing fighter compete with an attitude of attempting to win the fight or just to survive the offensive actions of their opponent? And then it goes on to say about a 10-8 round. A 10-8 round in MMA is not the most common score a judge will render, but it is absolutely essential to the evolution of the sport and the fairness to the fighters that judges understand and effectively utilize the score of a 10-8. A score of 10-8 does not require a fighter to dominate their opponent for 5 minutes of a round. The score of 10-8 is utilized by the judge when the judge sees verifiable actions on the part of either fighter. Judge shall always give a score of 10-8 when the judge has established that one fighter has dominated the action of the round, had duration of the domination, and also impacted their opponent with either effective strikes or grappling maneuvers that have diminished the abilities of their opponent.
Correct. But I'm going to go back to what you said about the 10-9. I think you focused a little bit too much on the one punch. And you're right. That's a very pertinent point you make, because as judges, we don't give 10-10s. We're forced to make our decision, as you should. But what I'm saying is that 10-9, you'll see that invariably more than anything else, because a 10-9, that's where I think it could possibly be unfair. If we did experiment maybe in the future, looking at expanding on the criteria into the half points, because the 10-9 at the moment, as you said, could be a 1 or 2 strike difference, but it could also be something that's quite wide and varied. But it's so competitive, but it's so wide and varied, but it's so competitive. It's not enough to tip into a 10-8. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I do. Where you're seeing that the other fighter still is clearly competing, he's still fighting, he's still engaging. Yeah, okay, he's maybe on the losing side, but he's not necessarily taking a massive beating. But he's losing the round clearly, but he's still very much in the fight, still competing, still a worthy adversary.
Yeah, gets 9 points. Then go back to the other side of the coin. There was 1 punch difference. He's still going to get 9 points. You know what I'm saying? So I think the potential expansion on that, I think that me and Herb have discussed this before as well. We're on the same page. Like I kind of
I'm sorry to interrupt. So it's kind of open to a little bit of interpretation. So maybe the language could be cleaned up a little bit. Is that what you're saying?
You're right there, mate. This is the thing that we can't say. People think that judging is an exact science. Okay, that's why. Look, I'll rally into that point you made about you said 5 judges. Why?
Well, I'd say 5 judges because obviously the more opinions, the better. And if there's 2 judges that seem to be scoring it correctly, and I'll give you an example of why that's not an exact science in a second. But if you've got 3, well, there's just more opinions. But if you've got 3 or 4 that are completely correct, and the other one's on cloud cuckoo land and doesn't know what he's watching, which sadly we do see sometimes. We see some crazy scoring, then that one's discounted. That's thrown out the window. It's like they might as well not even been there. The majority rules.
I see what you're saying, but you could have 5. Why the 5? Why not go 7, 9, 10?
Well,
when you expand, mate, what you're looking for there is an aggregate score. What I'm more inclined to do, okay? I believe that the three is more than ample, okay? Because you are looking for a majority, a consensus. And of course, sometimes you'll have a split decision. What's the big misconception when you hear people go, rob? As soon as I hear the word robbery, I haven't watched the fight. What do I automatically think? Fuck, that was a close fight. That's what I know it is.
That get used too much.
Let me flip this on its head. And I get where sometimes people look for radical change and do this and this. 2 things. It's 2025. AI, 8K cameras. We're going to get rid of the humans. Do you want that? I wouldn't want that.
No.
What we need to do is, and something that we have been doing, I think a much easier, quicker and faster resolve is this. Whoever those 3 people are sitting in those chairs, if you're sure in your mind that they are the most competent, considered and educated people, you're going to get the fairest possible result. I always use the analogy of the car, okay? The car is capable of going around the track, okay? If somebody gets in there who's not too sure or too familiar with a car and they can't drive very well, they're going to curb it, hit another car, etc. It's not the car, it's the driver. And it goes back to what I'm saying about, especially with my colleagues at the very top of this sport. Honestly, mate, they're so immersed. They take it so personal. Sometimes I have to get away from it. When we go down for breakfast, we're talking about fights. Yeah. After the fights we've just worked at that night, we're talking about fights. Honestly, they're some of the most conscientious, immersed people in the sport. And not just like I said, people are humans. We are not beyond reproach. You should not be beyond reproach. If something's gone wrong, we should be able to speak up about that. If something's gone wrong, then we need to identify the potential for further experience, training, wherever it is. But don't go all left field with it. I'm not saying you are, other people do. What I'm saying is, let's concentrate. Look, the car is perfectly safe. Let's concentrate all the education, the emphasis, the competency, the assessment of if you've got the very best people sat in the chairs and the very competent person stood in there as the referee, the fighters will get the fairest possible chance. Not an exact science. We have to have that's the human element of the, I don't know how advanced and stuff like the stuff, if somebody's hurt, you can hear something, is AI going to be able to pick that up? Can cameras do that? I just believe that, the current system we have, yes, keep investing, keep training, keep looking, don't get complacent. But we're in a far better place now than we ever have been. Please believe me.
Yeah, no. And I do, Mark, and I just want to clarify that I do believe that all judges, they do have the best of intentions and they are watching and trying to do their best. Of course, I don't think there's any malicious intent or any people not trying to do the best job possible, because I know they are conscientious. But you made me think of something there. Aaron Bronstetter, who I'm sure you're familiar with, great journalist from Canada, he mentioned on Twitter, and this is something that's been coming up recently, why is there not more transparency, in your opinion, about some potential controversial scorecards? There's been suggestions that maybe they could speak to the media afterwards and give an explanation of why. Here's why I scored it that way. And then therefore that would serve as a purpose to for the fighter who maybe lost the fight to understand, and B, also for the masses in general to understand the sport a little bit better.
I get that totally. And it's something that I've fell foul of, shall we say, because there's some people that and jurisdictions and commissions and stuff, they're very strict on it. They do not want their officials speaking out. And that's why we can't, because it would cost us work, or we have to respect their wishes sometimes. And also by the same token is, I understand that point of view as well, because sometimes with the commissions, if it comes from the commission representative, whatever's said and done, the responsibility lies with them. If you had a left field or a rogue judge or official, not just picking on judges, but if he went out and said a load of, you could be any place in the world and you had somebody there that was less experienced, we're not at liberty to understand or keep control of what he's saying, And like I said, look, I'm all for that. I am absolutely all for that. Like I said about the court of public opinion, I think that, if you're talking to a like-minded or a collection of like-minded people that want to hear what you want to say, maybe give a reason for your particular decision, I'm all for that. But I don't think I think it would gather legs and run away. It's kind of like, you're leading them to the gallows immediately after, right, get that judge, get him in and put him on the press row, stuff like that. I think it would run away with itself. I understand the common sense behind it. What better place to understand the decision of a person is getting it from that person. I totally get it. But some commissions are very firm on that, and they do not want, they'll copy other major sports, and they do not want their officials speaking out, because the de facto answer, and obviously what they want to say as a commission, is going to come from them. And it's what we abide by. It's funny because you mentioned there with Aaron Bronstetter quickly, good guy. He's put a lot of work in behind the scenes, mileage. And he said, when he was in California, he got invited to the post-fight meeting with people know that the executive director in California is Andy Foster, very well-respected guy, very smart, articulate, knows the sport, practitioner himself, knows the sport inside out. And he's taken, so you can see things like that. It's just evolution, Mike. It's like things are coming to us, steps are being taken. I think that's a massively positive step, that you have a reporter who can come in, listen to a commission meeting, and then have free reign to talk about that outside to the open world. I think potentially that is a slower, more sensible option than throwing the judges or the referees into. Do you know what I'm saying?
100%. That sounds very logical, to be honest.
It's transparency. It's measured. It can be contained. And then, like I said, the bigger, more well-known referees or officials, yes, there's 1,000 of times I've wanted to speak out, mate, but I've chose not to for a couple of reasons. One is it could be frowned upon, so I have to respect that. And the second is that with all that goodwill and intention, yourself, you're trying to do it, and then you'll get a bunch of clowns who'll just come and fuck it up for everyone. And it's kind of like, well, why am I doing this? You don't want to hear my explanation. You just want to, it's a difficult one. but I understand.
Yeah, and there's a level of professionalism as well. You know, you got to hold yourself to a certain level, and you're not there to explain yourself to every Tom, Dick, and Harry. Last one on this one, and then we'll move on to some more positive stuff. This isn't a negative stuff, but I do want to ask you about some of your favorite moments, some holy shit moments, because obviously you're a fan of the sport as well. But fighters as judges, retired fighters as judges. Chris Lieben, he's out there. We see him at a lot of events these days. But what's your opinion on that one? Because fighters, as you know, I mean, fighters understand the sport. Fighters know the sport. They can compete in the sport. Maybe they don't understand it to the degree that you do. But we're also imperfect, volatile, emotional creatures. What is your opinion on judges essentially being replaced by retired fighters?
I am all in favor of anybody coming from the sport, be it obviously a practitioner, a fighter, competitor, coach, wherever it may be, walking in or treading the realms of or would-be realms of an official. I'm all for it. Is it a de facto prerequisite? Categorically not. I can put that to bed right now. It just is not. It doesn't work like that. I understand that fighters will, like I said, Chris Lieben's a great example. Obviously, he lives in California. He's put a lot of hard yards in, a lot of years. Like at the amateur, he hasn't just walked in and been given this, this badge and been sat cage side for a UFC pay-per-view. He has literally spent a lot of money training and getting his certification. And he's put a lot of hard yards and years in, just as he did when a fighter, as it begins, any fighter that comes up, they don't automatically draft to the UFC. They're going to spend months and years going through the levels, amateur to local shows, bigger national promotions, et cetera, et cetera. I think that, and that's the aptitude of the person. Look, if you as an ex-fighter in particular showed a level of aptitude to be able to take to the officiating side, judging, refereeing, wherever it may be, I'm all for it. I'm here with open arms. The more competent people we have, it's simply the better. But I can honestly say with all the greatest of respect in the world, just because you have been a competitor, it is not a prerequisite to being an automatic as a good official. It just doesn't work like that. But you're in a great place from a practical perspective and understanding of the sport, for sure.
Very well answered without pissing off any fighters. You wanted to say, you're all a bunch of crazy bastards, Michael.
Let me give you to this.
You're all a bunch of crazy psychopaths. You're not fit to judge.
I'll give you an example. You want to be refereed by Wanderlei Silva.
No way.
There you go. There's one example.
Way.
Nothing against Wanderlei, but do you want to be refereed by him? No. He's going to fucking, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
The qualities possessed by the individual are way more important. And if that means having a 15, 20 year as a career as a fighter, in conjunction with that, bingo.
And again, I'm hesitant to even say this because it just seems, because everyone has this thought process that I'm just defending the UFC. This is just me giving my experiences. But when we did that coaching seminar or the officiating seminar, they had us judge a fight. And I'm sure, and it wasn't a UFC fight, it was some Russian MMA promotion. And it was a pretty hard, convoluted fight to judge. And I'm sure they picked that fight on person. But at the end of it, myself, Cruz, DC, Laura Sanko, John Anik, we all scored it different ways, and I think they did that on purpose just to demonstrate, hey, you little pricks, before you start talking shit about the judges, you guys can't even agree on the same thing. So it is tougher and a bit more open to interpretation than what people believe. Anyway, as I said, Mark, listen, anytime on a Monday, I click open social media, I see you're there. You're all over the world. You're at every pay-per-view event. You've traveled the world. You've been involved in some of the biggest fights of the greatest sport on planet Earth. And yes, you take your job seriously. And yes, you don't let any favoritism or anything like that get involved. But you love what you do. And talk me through some of the biggest highlights of your career, some of the things that you saw, some of the holy shit moments when you were in a cage and you just see this wild knockout, which you didn't expect.
Yeah, first and foremost, yes, I am in love with this sport. because like yourself, you know, invested, grew up half my life, literally half my life, you know, trawling all the backstreet clubs and all the bullshit areas that people wouldn't do. People think a lot of people are in love with the end destination, but not necessarily what it takes to get there. And that's the same as any craft, or same as a fighter, coach, wherever it may be, commentator. You know, people wake up and, hey, I want to be a UFC commentator. Slow down a little bit. Have you done any yet? No. Well, calm down. But,
I did about, I want to say 8 years working pre and post fight shows and doing other little bits of TV work, commentated some Shuto events, and then I graduated eventually to Contender, and then from Contender, then I got a shot at the UFC. So to your point entirely. 1,000,000%,
mate. And going back to the question you asked was holy shit moments. It's funny because what Dana said after UFC 300, and it was very, very pertinent what he said. He goes, I sell holy shit moments. Now, I was there front and center for the biggest holy shit moment I think the sport has ever seen. Referring to Max and Justin, you know, how can you make that up? 459, not the first, second, third, 459 of the fifth round in a title fight in Vegas. I mean, like I said, mate, if you remember, something that was totally involuntary, I screamed. Like I've never done that before in my life. I've never done that.
Goddard screaming, come on.
I was like, wow, yeah, I've never done that before in my life. You know, and like, mate, there were so many things. Obviously, the UFC is top of the tree, and they've granted me everything. I've been in incredible places with other people, but that's the thing, mate. Like, I've been around the world, mate, as you know, twice, there and back again, still doing it. I can. That's why I have no time for bullshit, mate, because I can be nothing other than entirely grateful every single day. And I'm like I said, all the other promotions that have helped me, and Cage Warriors, and back in the early days, they helped me get really established. That's how the UFC noticed me, because of Cage Warriors back in the day. But all the British promotions I worked through with Cage Gladiators and Zorba and Bama, then moving further afield, going to all the work that I did with the International Federation, helping with the amateurs, setting up so many things, mate. And like I said, I'm not finished yet. You know, I don't know how much longer I'm going to be. No one knows what's around the corner, but I can take, you know, like you said, I was saying before about when people are coming at you and people are coming hard, just smile and move on. Nothing hits them harder, you know. And like I said, I'm comfortable with who I am, what I'm doing, and I'm sounding boring saying it, mate, but I'm just so fucking thankful, you know, so thankful.
Yeah. Mate, and so am I. We're glad. We are all lucky to have someone that cares about your role just as much. And by the way, all the referees do. I always say that. I've got a question here that a lot of people put on Twitter to ask you. I already know the answer, but I'm going to ask it. They're like, why is he always so mean? Why does he shout at the fighters? It's like, well, because you got two alpha males that are trying to kick the shit out of each other. You've got to be the daddy in that situation. But Marc, referee, Mr. Goddard, why are you always so mean when you speak to the fighters?
Guys, honestly, bro, they haven't got, this is what makes me like, you know, listen to how other refs talk to fighters. I think I'm quite fucking mild. You know what it is, man? I worked this out a while ago, obviously going to the US. I think it's the British accent. They can't cope with it, or they can't. I could say to somebody, you know, what you just said, I'm in an arena, 20,000 people screaming, the guys there, something mad's happened. Am I going to tap? Excuse me. No, I have to keep control. I'm sorry if I have a presence and I'm loud and I'm there to do my job. Go listen to how some other refs talk to fighters. I think I'm quite mild, but you know, I'm in a role of authority by nature. I'm sorry if me using that and you know, getting my point across or trying to keep control of two guys in a legal fist fight trying to take each other's fucking heads off is upsetting your equilibrium. And so I do have the lighter side of the coin. Go look at my exchange in November with Brandon Moreno. You know, Brandon, probably one of the most beloved UFC fighters, right, by everyone. And we had a little exchange when he got poked in the eye. Can you see me? Everything good? You know what Brandon's like. He's an absolute sweetheart, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's like, yes, sir. Can you continue? Yes, sir. Good man. And then everyone's like, well, here's another one that makes me laugh. This is the crazy world of Twitter. So for years and years and years, I've said the same thing. When the fights come together, World Championship main event, and I say, blah, 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 God bless. That's my way of saying I'm not an overly religious person. I was when I was
I know that. I know that. And I see you say God bless every time. I'm like, oh, way to bloody pander to the American audience.
I was raised a Catholic and stuff like people don't. I was raised a Catholic. I was an altar boy. And this is what makes you laugh. This is what proves that the internet is fucking mental. So I'll say, God bless. One of the funniest comments I remember saying it to Habib. Somebody goes, you can't say God bless. He's a Muslim. Fucking hell.
For crying out loud.
Then another one they'll go, you can't say, stop forcing your religious views on fighters.
Do you know what I mean? Because I was raised a Catholic as well, and I'm not religious, Maybe I haven't seen the light yet, guys, so feel sorry for me. Don't come for me. But I'll use the term God bless. You know what I mean? Not from a religious standpoint, just because it's an expression in daily English, England, UK society. For some reason, it's got nothing to do with the conversation. It's like when I fought Anderson Silva and we went up to each other. Right before the fight started, I gave him a hug and I said, good luck. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, but I said good luck, meaning let's both of us get out of this with our faculties. We're going to beat the shit out of each other, and I hope I win. I don't mean good luck like that, but it's like I respect you as a brother in the martial arts, and you're a goddamn legend. So good luck. Hopefully, we both go back to our families, and we can see, we can talk, we don't have injuries. We're not on bloody crutches or whatever. I don't 100%, know what that's going to do.
That's why I say, when I say, what I mean is, guys, whoever the higher power is, whoever your higher power is, I just want you both to walk out of here under your own steam. That's it. I just want you to both, you're going to do what you got to do. And I hope you get out of here under your own steam and you're protected. Yeah. But stop fucking forcing your religious views on me.
Mark, how dare you? We'll
wrap
this one up.
Best fight, by the way.
What's that?
Anderson. Do you think is that your best fight performance?
Yes. Yeah, because I had to dig through. I had to dig deep. I had to fight through adversity. Obviously, at one point, I had one eye in the fight, as it were. So every fight was bloody hard. But the blood everywhere and getting dropped in round 3. I was glad the fight went down that way because it made it humbly a much more legendary performance. And I know I beat him. I know I beat him fair and square, and it pisses me off when people don't understand the rule set. Just like when I fought Dan Henderson in Manchester, I know I won that fight as well. Yeah, he won round 1. Yeah, he won round 2. But I beat the shit out of him for rounds 3, 4, and 5. And I was winning rounds 1 and 2 until I got dropped as well. So you ain't going to tell me, Mark. I know which one.
Honestly, I will come back and say, like, I'm not just saying it again. You said the same. I'm not saying it because we're mates or blow smoke. But the Anderson, it's such a good educational fight for people to see that a fight is a 5-round thing. And people remember, what do they remember? He had a good round in the 5th round and the flying knee. They don't remember rounds 1, 2, and 3 that you'd won convincingly. And
1, 2, and 4. Yeah.
Sorry, 1, 2, and 4. He won 3 and 5, and it's just. Yep. I think it's GSP and Hendricks is another fantastic one I use for training, but I'm giving away all the secrets.
Yeah. Mark, 20 years ago, when I came down to Stevie B's workout warehouse, when we were competing on these shows and there was drug dealers everywhere and there was all kinds of madness and all the rest of it, could you have seen in your wildest dreams that fast forward to 2025? And I always use this as a weird barometer or a benchmark of how mixed martial arts has grown. Of course, in the States, it's massive. It's mainstream. It really is. And in the UK, even though it's not on a localized time zone, it's catching up big time. I remember back in the day, no one cared about it. No one even knew what it was. Now, on a Sunday or a Monday morning, when I click at Facebook, because I use Facebook to keep in touch with all my old mates and people from where I'm from, they're all talking about the fights on a Monday morning. Whoa, did you see that? That was incredible and all the rest of it. But the question is, did you ever dream in your wildest imagination that fast forward to today, that this sport would be as big, as beloved, as well, it's always been entertaining, but just reached a level that it has here today?
Not a clue, mate. None of us did we? None of us. I had no idea what was, and I think that's the best way. I'm a firm believer in fate. I think I use the example of me finding my way into reffing. I think that your life may zig or zag, but if you're fortunate enough to find your calling and find your way, and I think that the best things happen by accident or unplanned. You know, like I said about me reffing, just being called in, or like you, how you got started in martial arts, what made you want to start back in martial arts, all these little decisions you made, all the little decisions that added up to this massive pyramid. You know, that's the beauty of life, isn't it? We don't have sometimes, I know a lot of people say about, oh yeah, I had all this worked out. Okay, that's cool, that's great. But I think that, you know, I tried to surmise it with what I said earlier. I think that luck can play a little bit more of a part in terms of getting you in the right opportunity meeting circumstance, right? Or preparation meeting opportunity will create circumstance.
But as the old saying goes, the harder you work, the luckier you seem to get.
I agree.
Marc Goddard, you are the man. You are an old friend. We can say that publicly now. We had to keep that quiet on the down low in the early days. And Mike, I can't be seen with you in a restaurant or whatever. But now I'm a commentator. Mark, next time I'm on the road, hopefully you will grace me with your presence in Sydney or Saudi Arabia. We'll say Sydney. We can have a beer there. Thank you for your time. You are the man. You are an old friend. You're one of the best at what you do. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate your time. Oh, your courses. Your courses.
Yes,
do you want to give that a plug, please?
Yeah, I mean, well, twofold. Number one, obviously, you'll see I do in person, like weekend certified, verified seminars. But if anybody, you know, they always talk about how do I get an understanding of the rule set, reffing and judging. Go to my website, goddardmma.com, and on there is there is a tab under training, and there was actual over nearly 3 hours of video content that people can download and purchase and get a massive head start into what the actual unified rules are and the explanation on the judging criteria. So thanks for that, mate.
Yeah, no, beautiful. It's a great resource for a lot of people. And I think a lot of people watching this hopefully understand things a little bit better. Mark, thank you for your time. You're the absolute man. See you soon.
Top man, Mike. Thanks.